There are stories whispered across centuries about a book that should not exist, a book that never rests on any library shelf, that rarely appears in plain daylight, and when it does, it changes the lives of those who encounter it. It is described in fragments, in symbols, in veiled references scattered through history. Some called it the Book of Forbidden Knowledge, while others referred to it as a codex of power. Its pages were said to reveal the greatest secret of all, the ability to bend reality itself. But what does that mean, to bend reality? Is it the language of superstition? A promise too grand for reason to accept? Is it the invention of occultists who cloaked ordinary truths in mystery and metaphor? Or is it, beneath the layers of myth, a profound psychological insight into the way the human mind shapes the world it perceives? The notion that reality is malleable has long terrified rulers and institutions for millennia. Because if reality can be bent, then the authority of kings, churches, and governments can be bent as well. Those who controlled the narrative of reality controlled the people who lived inside it. That is why knowledge, throughout history, has been treated as something dangerous, something to be restricted, monitored, or even outlawed. We don't need to look far to find examples of forbidden books. The Book of Enoch, excluded from the Bible, described visions of angels who revealed heavenly secrets to humans. The Kybalion, a Hermetic text published in 1908, claimed to unveil universal laws that govern both mind and matter. Charles Haanel's Master Key system was banned from certain schools and libraries because it taught people that thoughts themselves were a creative force. These were not children's fairy tales. They were works feared by those in power because they gave ordinary people access to ideas that threatened the structures of authority. But to think of the forbidden book as a single volume is to misunderstand it. The banned book is less an object than a pattern. It reappears in different forms across history, sometimes as scripture, sometimes as philosophy, sometimes as psychology, always carrying the same dangerous message. Reality is not as fixed as it seems. When we hear the phrase, bend reality, we might think of miracles or magic tricks, of breaking the laws of physics with some supernatural force. But the more profound, more unsettling truth is this. Reality bends not when nature's laws are broken, but when human perception is altered. Reality is experienced, filtered, and defined by the mind. If you can shape what people believe, you can shape the world they live in. This is why rulers commissioned theologians to write official doctrine, and why monarchs censored books that questioned the divine right. Why empires tortured heretics and burned libraries. The forbidden book was not always burned because it was nonsense. It was burned because it was powerful. Today, in the 21st century, we like to believe that we have outgrown superstition. We imagine that reality is firmly grounded in scientific fact, that truth emerges from evidence, and that the world is seen as it truly is. But look closer, and you begin to see cracks in the glass. Media narratives bend perceptions of truth. Advertising manufactures desire. Politicians frame events to fit agendas. Social media algorithms subtly decide what millions perceive as reality every second. The forbidden book, it seems, has not vanished. It has only changed form. So the question becomes urgent. Who decides what is real? How much of what you believe to be reality is genuinely your own experience, and how much has been shaped for you by unseen hands? What power is granted to those who can control that shaping? The forbidden book is not hidden in a dusty monastery anymore. It exists in every headline, in every screen, in every whisper of advertising that slips beneath awareness. Its pages are written not on parchment, but in the language of psychology, sociology, and technology, and those who know how to read it wield a power far greater than armies or wealth. The power to control the story in which billions live their lives. This journey is not about fantasy. It is not about magic spells or supernatural miracles. It is about something far more dangerous, far more real. The recognition that belief itself is the fabric of reality, and that those who control belief control the world. The forbidden book reveals this unsettling truth. And once it is seen, it cannot be unseen. Reality as a human construction. What is reality? It seems like the most straightforward question. We assume reality is what is out there, independent of us, governed by physical laws that we merely observe. Yet, from the earliest philosophers to the most advanced neuroscientists, one unsettling truth keeps reappearing. Reality is not directly given. It is filtered, interpreted, and constructed by the human mind. Plato described it with the allegory of the cave. Imagine prisoners chained so that all they can see are shadows cast on the wall before them. To them, those shadows are reality. Only when one prisoner escapes and sees the fire, and beyond the fire the world itself, does he realize that what he once took as truth was only a distorted projection. The allegory is not about literal caves or fires. It is about perception. It is about recognizing that human beings often mistake interpretations for reality, and that to bend reality, one only needs to bend the shadows that people believe are real. Centuries later, Immanuel Kant would put this in philosophical terms. He argued that the world as it is in itself, the noumenon, is forever inaccessible to us. What we experience instead is the phenomenon, reality, as shaped by the categories of our mind: space, time, causality. The mind does not passively receive reality. It actively structures it. What we call reality is already filtered, sorted, and reconstructed by the machinery of human thought. Modern cognitive science confirms what these thinkers suspected. Our senses do not deliver an objective stream of data. They deliver fragments, raw signals, which the brain assembles into a coherent picture of the world. Vision, for instance, is not a camera. The eye has blind spots. The brain fills them in. Colors are not inherent properties of objects, but rather wavelengths that are interpreted by the brain as hues. What you see is not the world as it is, but the brain's best guess at what might be, helpful for survival. The evolutionary psychologist Donald Hoffman has argued that perception is more like a desktop interface than a mirror of truth. Just as the icons on a computer do not reveal the circuitry inside, but provide us with symbols we can use, so too perception gives us icons, simplified models of reality that help us act. They are not truth itself, but instruments for survival. If this is the case, then what we call reality is already a kind of illusion, useful fiction designed to keep us alive, and yet, even beyond biology, reality bends further under the weight of culture, language, and belief. Consider the placebo effect. A sugar pill with no active ingredient can heal pain, lower blood pressure, even shrink symptoms of disease, so long as the patient believes it works. The body responds not to chemistry but to expectation. Reality, at the level of lived experience, obeys belief, or take framing in psychology. The way information is presented alters how people perceive it. Tell a patient that a surgery has a 90% survival rate and they are likely to accept it. Tell them it has a 10% death rate and many will refuse, even though the facts are identical. Reality does not shift, but the mind's interpretation of it does, and that shift can determine life or death decisions. Social conditioning takes this further. What counts as usual, acceptable, accurate, or false is not given by nature but by collective agreement. Money, for instance, has no intrinsic value. A $100 bill is only paper and ink. Yet because societies believe in it, it governs economies, careers, and destinies. Borders on a map are invisible lines, yet they dictate who may live where, who must fight in wars, who has rights, and who does not. These are realities constructed by consensus, and they are enforced as if they were laws of nature. It is here that the forbidden book reveals its first secret. Reality is not a single, unchanging thing. It is layered. There is the physical world, yes, but there is also the world of perception and the world of collective belief. And it is in these latter realms that reality is most pliable. Religions understood this long ago. Myths and rituals were not entertainment. They were frameworks that shaped how people saw existence itself. To believe in the wrath of gods or the promise of salvation was to live in a different reality than those who did not. For the believer, heaven and hell were not abstract concepts. They were tangible realities. They were the most real things imaginable, shaping every decision, every fear, every hope. In the 20th century, psychologists demonstrated just how deeply belief can shape perception. In Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments, individuals would deny the evidence of their own eyes to agree with a group's false judgment. Show them lines of different lengths, and if the group insists that two unequal lines are the same, many participants would conform. Reality, the length of a line, bent under the pressure of social consensus. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments added a darker dimension. Participants, instructed by an authority figure, delivered what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to others, despite hearing cries of pain. They did so because belief in authority overpowered their personal perception of morality. Here, reality was not bent by shadows or illusions, but by the weight of obedience. This raises the disturbing possibility that reality is not only constructed but also manipulable. If perception can be altered, if belief can reshape experience, then reality itself can be bent, not in the sense of breaking physics, but in the sense of changing the lived world of individuals and societies. The forbidden book, then, is not an ancient artifact, but a metaphor for this hidden truth, that reality is entangled with psychology. Those who understand how minds construct the world can, in turn, reconstruct the world people live in. It is a knowledge so simple that it can be dismissed, yet so powerful that entire empires have risen and fallen upon it. Consider propaganda. A lie repeated enough becomes truth to those who hear it. Once internalized, it no longer matters whether it corresponds to the external world. What matters is that it structures the believer's experience. In Nazi Germany, millions believed in a racial mythology that justified war and genocide. For them, that mythology was reality. It organized their fears, their hopes, their actions. In Soviet Russia, the illusion of progress and equality masked the horrors of famine and purges. Again, belief reshaped the perception of millions. But we do not need to look to dictatorships to see this. In modern democracies, media framing determines which issues are prioritized, which are overlooked, which voices are amplified, and which are silenced. A single photograph or a single headline can define how entire populations interpret events. Reality itself seems different depending on which narrative one consumes. If reality is constructed, then the book that reveals this is indeed a dangerous one. It undermines certainty. It strips away the illusion that what we see is final. It suggests that human beings live in shared fictions, fragile agreements, and psychological constructs. This is unsettling, because it means that the ground beneath us is not solid, but shifting. Yet it also means that reality is not only a horizon, but also a possibility. If reality bends under belief, then it can be bent toward liberation as well as control. The placebo heals as much as it deceives. Collective belief can imprison, but it can also inspire revolutions, movements, and new ways of living. This is the forbidden knowledge that has traveled across centuries, that the walls of the cave are not immutable stone, but shadows, that what we call reality is, in many ways, a story told by the human mind. To bend reality, then, is to bend the story, and to bend the story is to bend the world. The ancient keepers of hidden knowledge. Throughout history, knowledge has never been evenly distributed. Certain truths were whispered in secret chambers, recorded in coded manuscripts, and passed from master to disciple behind closed doors. The idea that reality could be bent through thought, symbol, or ritual was not something given to the masses. It was guarded, hidden, and often punished when revealed. Consider the ancient Egyptians. Their priests were not merely religious functionaries. They were custodians of symbols, hieroglyphs, and rituals believed to connect heaven and earth. Temples were libraries of coded wisdom, teaching astronomy disguised as myth, medicine cloaked in ceremony, and psychology wrapped in spiritual initiation. The Hermetic texts that emerged from Egypt and later Greece declared, "As above, so below." This simple phrase contained a dangerous suggestion. The human mind was not separate from the cosmos, but a reflection of it. To change one was to influence the other. To those in power, such knowledge could not be freely shared. In the early centuries of Christianity, texts such as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary proposed a radical idea: that divine truth was not mediated exclusively, mediated by institutions, but was accessible within the individual. These Gnostic writings were swiftly condemned, declared heretical, and driven underground. To read them was to risk one's life. Why? Because they shifted power from the church hierarchy to the individual believer. To say that the kingdom of God was within was to bend the reality of authority itself. Medieval Europe carried on this tradition of suppression. Books that challenged doctrine were burned, and those who possessed them were branded heretics. The grimoire, books of spells, invocations, and symbols, were outlawed not simply because they dealt with spirits or demons, but because they suggested that ordinary people could access forces outside the control of priests and kings. If a farmer could summon healing, insight, or influence without the sanction of the church, the entire hierarchy trembled. Thus, the grimoires were called dangerous, forbidden, and sometimes even satanic. But perhaps what was truly dangerous was not that they invoked spirits, but that they invoked autonomy. The Masons and other secret societies of the Enlightenment carried this thread further. Their rites, symbols, and coded degrees were not simply empty rituals. They encoded philosophies of human liberty, the mathematics of sacred geometry, and moral codes that prioritized the individual conscience over external decree. To the outside world, their secrecy made them suspicious. To insiders, secrecy was protection, not only from persecution but from dilution. Knowledge that could bend perception and reality had to be shielded from those who would misuse it. The Forbidden Book, then, was never one volume. It was a pattern of concealment. Whenever knowledge emerged that revealed the malleability of reality, it was hidden, persecuted, or shrouded in mystery. Knowledge was a form of power, and power thrives on scarcity. The pattern is clear. First, knowledge arises that challenges the ruling narrative. Second, authorities suppress it, branding it dangerous. Third, the knowledge goes underground, surviving only in fragments, symbols, or secret circles. And fourth, centuries later, fragments resurface, only to be suppressed again under new forms. Why did this happen so consistently? Because reality is not just physical, it is social, psychological, and political. And to control reality, one must control what people believe about it. When rulers monopolized access to Scripture, they monopolized access to God. When monarchs claimed divine right, they monopolized access to legitimacy. When inquisitors burned books, they monopolized access to possibility. But suppression alone was not enough. Elites also created their own symbolic languages to communicate truths beyond the reach of ordinary perception. Alchemy, for instance, is said to have the ability to turn lead into gold. On the surface, it was chemistry. But beneath the surface, it was a matter of psychology. To turn lead into gold was to transmute the self, to bend reality by reshaping consciousness. Such metaphors protected the knowledge while also concealing it from those who would dismiss or misuse it. The Renaissance saw a revival of these hidden traditions. Hermetic texts were rediscovered, and thinkers like Giordano Bruno proclaimed that the universe was infinite, with stars being suns that had their own worlds. For such ideas, Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600, not because he was irrational, but because he bent reality too far beyond the sanctioned boundaries of belief. He showed that the Forbidden Book was not only a relic of ancient Egypt or medieval mysticism, it was alive in the very act of questioning consensus reality. Even into the modern era, knowledge has been classified as dangerous. Consider Charles Haanel's Master Key System, a correspondence course in the early 1900s that taught visualization, affirmation, and the creative power of thought. It was banned from some libraries and discouraged in certain schools. Why? Because it suggested that wealth, success, and power were not merely inherited or decreed, but could be generated by individual mental focus. In a society built on hierarchy, such an idea was subversive. The Forbidden Book, then, is less about supernatural spells than it is about access to psychological and symbolic tools that alter perception. To bend reality is to bend how people interpret the world, and those who control that interpretation control the collective experience of reality, from priests to monarchs, from inquisitors to censors. The effort to open certain books was always, at its core, an attempt to suppress specific ways of seeing. What survives of these traditions today often looks fragmented, symbols carved into cathedrals whose meanings are lost to the public. Masonic lodges practicing rituals outsiders dismiss as pageantry. Ancient manuscripts housed in the university archive are read by only a few. Yet the core remains, a lineage of hidden knowledge that whispers the same secret, that reality is not rigid but pliable, that human beings are not prisoners of circumstance but participants in its construction. And perhaps the greatest secret of all is that the Forbidden Book never needed to exist in physical form. It existed wherever human beings noticed the gap between appearance and reality, between what is believed and what is possible. It existed in the recognition that the world is not as fixed as it seems, and that those who understand this have the power to change everything. This is why the forbidden book is always feared. Because once the illusion is broken, once people see that reality is partly a construction, no institution can hold complete power over them again. The book is not dangerous because it contains lies. It is dangerous because it contains truths that unravel the authority of those who claim to speak for reality itself. The ancient keepers of hidden knowledge understood this. They encoded their truths in myths, parables, in geometry and ritual. They hid them not out of arrogance but out of necessity. To reveal too much was to invite persecution. To reveal nothing was to let the knowledge die. And so they walked the narrow path of secrecy, carrying fragments of the forbidden book forward through centuries of darkness. And yet, the book keeps resurfacing, in new forms, under new names, in new languages, because reality, though often controlled, cannot be permanently caged. Human beings always rediscover that the world is not fixed. They always rediscover that belief shapes experience, and that experience shapes the world. The forbidden book, in the end, is not a single manuscript, but the persistent human recognition that reality is malleable, and that those who know this hold the most dangerous kind of power. The psychology of belief and suggestion. If the forbidden book is a metaphor, then its most revealing chapter is written in the language of psychology. For all the myths, all the symbols, and esoteric codes across history, what they point to is something profoundly simple, yet profoundly unsettling. Human beings live in realities constructed by their own beliefs, and those beliefs can be shaped, molded, even rewritten. To bend reality is not to suspend the laws of physics, but to alter the patterns of human perception and behavior, and that, in turn, can reshape the world. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, believed that beneath the surface of conscious awareness lies the unconscious, a vast reservoir of desires, fears, and memories that shape how people perceive reality. His insight was not only that hidden drives influence us, but that suggestion can bypass reason and sink into this deeper layer. A patient might resist logic, but a suggestion delivered under the right conditions could reprogram the unconscious itself. In the hands of Freud, this was meant as therapy, but in the hands of others, it became a tool for persuasion. Carl Jung went further. He argued that the unconscious was not only personal but collective, a repository of archetypes, universal patterns of meaning. Myths, religions, and symbols worked because they resonated with these archetypes. A cross, a serpent, a circle of eternity. These images reached deeper than rational language ever could. To understand this was to hold the key to mass influence. For if reality is filtered through symbols, then those who wield the correct symbols can bend collective perception. Modern psychology has verified what these early thinkers suspected. The human mind is astonishingly suggestible. In hypnosis, a subject can be convinced that their arm is too heavy to lift, that a cold coin is burning hot, or that they are reliving a childhood memory. Under suggestion, perception itself shifts. What the subject sees, hears, and feels becomes pliable. This is not fantasy. It is documented repeatedly in both clinical and stage hypnosis alike. The implications are staggering. If an individual's sensory world can be altered by suggestion, then reality itself, for that individual, has been bent. But the power of suggestion is not confined to hypnosis. It permeates everyday life. The placebo effect is perhaps the clearest example. Give a patient a sugar pill, but tell them it is powerful medicine, and their symptoms may vanish. Pain eases, depression lifts, and blood pressure lowers. The body responds not to the pill itself, but to the belief about the pill. The mind's expectation translates into physiological change. If belief can alter biology, then belief is not a shadow of reality. Belief is part of reality's architecture. Psychologists have also documented the nocebo effect, the dark twin of placebo. If patients are told a harmless pill will cause side effects, many will develop them. If they believe they are cursed, their health can deteriorate. Fear itself becomes toxic. The lesson is clear. Suggestion can heal, but it can also harm. Reality bends both ways, depending on the beliefs instilled in us. Consider how this scales beyond the individual. Propaganda is nothing more than mass suggestion. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, understood this with chilling clarity. He wrote that people will believe a big lie more readily than a small one, and if you repeat it often enough, it becomes accepted as truth. Millions of ordinary Germans accepted myths of racial superiority and national destiny because those myths were repeated, dramatized, and embedded in every aspect of culture. Reality itself shifted. What was once unthinkable became normal. What was once abhorrent became a patriotic duty. Cult psychology provides another example. Groups like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate demonstrate how suggestion can create alternate realities in which followers surrender wealth, family, and even their lives. How does this happen? It begins with small commitments, reinforced by community consensus, framed by a charismatic authority, and sealed with repetition. Once inside, members live in a world defined by suggestion. Outsiders may call it delusion, but for the believer, it is a lived reality. Advertising works on the same principles, though with more subtlety. A commercial does not simply describe a product.
It suggests a story. Drink this soda and you belong.
Wear this brand and you are attractive. Buy this car and you are powerful. The product becomes a symbol, the symbol becomes a belief, and the belief shapes behavior. Billions are spent not to alter the product but to alter perception. The forbidden book of persuasion is alive in every advertisement. Even science, the very symbol of rationality, reveals the power of suggestion. In double-masked studies, researchers must prevent both patients and doctors from knowing who receives real treatment and who receives a placebo. Why? Because the mere suggestion of expectation can contaminate results. Belief is so potent that it must be rigorously controlled to isolate objective effects. Suggestion is not an exception to science. It is a variable science must constantly account for. If suggestion is this powerful, then the question arises, are we ever free from it? Every culture, every institution, every medium shapes belief through subtle suggestion. Schools suggest what counts as knowledge. Governments determine what constitutes law and order. The media suggest what counts as essential. Even language itself is a suggestion. When we label someone criminal or hero, terrorist or freedom fighter, we are not only describing, we are shaping perception. We are bending reality through words. This is why the forbidden book is so dangerous. It reveals that reality is not a neutral landscape, but a pliable construction shaped by suggestion. Once you see this, you recognize the levers of control everywhere. You see that much of what people call common sense is merely common suggestion. You see that what people defend as reality is often just belief dressed in the authority of truth. Yet this knowledge is double-edged, because if reality can be bent through belief, then it can be bent toward liberation or manipulation. The exact psychological mechanism that allows a placebo to heal allows propaganda to enslave. The same suggestibility that enables a patient to overcome trauma allows a cult leader to command obedience. The forbidden book does not decide how it is used. It merely exposes the mechanism. Perhaps the most haunting realization is that reality bending is not rare. It is constant. Each of us lives inside stories suggested by family, culture, history, and media. We inherit beliefs about what is possible, what is desirable, and what is true. Some of these beliefs heal and empower. Others bind and limit. To awaken to this is to recognize that we are already under suggestion. The only question is, whose suggestion are we living under? When Freud warned that civilization depends on illusion, he meant that societies run on collective fictions. When Jung spoke of archetypes, he suggested that symbols shape reality across cultures. When modern behavioral scientists study framing, they mean that how something is presented matters as much as what is offered. The forbidden book of psychology has been open all along, but few dare to read it because it demands that we abandon the illusion of certainty. To bend reality, one does not need magic. One needs only to understand the psychology of belief. For when belief shifts, perception shifts. And when perception shifts, action shifts. And when action shifts, the world itself follows. This is why rulers have feared forbidden books, why cults guard secret rituals, and why advertisers pay fortunes for seconds of attention. Because reality, as lived by human beings, is not fixed. It is written in the mind, and the mind can be rewritten. The psychology of suggestion is the forbidden book hidden in plain sight. It is a manual of persuasion written not in mystical symbols, but in experiments, stories, and human history. It tells us that reality bends where belief begins, and once that is understood, it becomes impossible to see the world the same way again. Reality benders of history. If reality is pliable, then history is the story of those who learned to bend it. Some did so through philosophy, some through faith, some through politics, and some through force. Each of them, in their own way, became readers, or perhaps writers, of the Forbidden Book. They discovered that to change the way people see the world is to change the world itself. Consider Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher and mathematician of the 6th century BCE. To most people, numbers were practical, tools for counting sheep or measuring land. But Pythagoras taught that numbers were not just symbols, but the essence of reality itself. He claimed that the universe was a harmony of proportion and vibration. His followers treated his teachings as sacred, even mystical. For them, mathematics was not merely calculation but revelation. To see the world as a number was to see order where others saw chaos. In this shift of perception, reality itself bent. What was once a confusing world of phenomena became a cosmos governed by hidden laws. A few centuries later, another figure appeared whose teachings reshaped civilizations: Jesus of Nazareth. Regardless of one's religious belief, the fact remains that his words created a reality that billions would inhabit. He proclaimed that the meek would inherit the earth, that love was stronger than law, and that the kingdom of God was within. To follow him was not simply to accept ideas, but to inhabit an entirely different reality, one in which suffering carried meaning, forgiveness transcended vengeance, and death was not the end. For the early Christians, the Roman Empire was not the final authority. Their reality was larger, their loyalty to a higher order. This was dangerous knowledge, and it bent the trajectory of history. The Buddha in India offered a similar transformation. By teaching that suffering arises from attachment and that liberation comes from letting go, he offered a new lens through which to see existence. Life, which had seemed an endless cycle of pain and desire, could now be understood as a path toward awakening. For his followers, the world itself shifted. Everyday suffering became not a curse, but a teacher, a stepping stone toward enlightenment. Again, reality bent, not by altering external circumstances, but by changing the meaning through which those circumstances were experienced. Move forward to the Renaissance and encounter Niccolò Machiavelli. Unlike prophets, Machiavelli was not concerned with salvation or liberation. His concern was power. In The Prince, he wrote not about how rulers should be, but about how they must appear to be. For Machiavelli, perception was more important than morality. A ruler could be cruel, but if he appeared merciful, he secured loyalty. A ruler could be weak, but if he appeared strong, he discouraged rebellion. By shifting the focus from what is to what seems to be, Machiavelli bent the reality of politics. Had demonstrated that the proper machinery of power is not force alone, but the manipulation of appearances. Centuries later, this insight would be weaponized by some of history's darkest figures. Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels understood that reality could be manufactured through propaganda. Goebbels orchestrated spectacles where flags, uniforms, and slogans created a collective trance. Films depicted Jews as parasites, enemies as monsters, the Führer as savior. These were not mere lies. They were alternate realities constructed through suggestion, repetition, and fear. Millions lived and died inside that constructed world. Here, the Forbidden Book became a manual of domination, its pages stained with blood. But reality bending is not confined to religion or politics. In the modern era, it extends into commerce and technology. Consider the rise of contemporary marketing. Edward Bernays, nephew of Freud, applied psychoanalytic insights to advertising. He realized that people did not buy products for their utility, but for what those products symbolized. Cigarettes became torches of freedom when marketed to women as a sign of liberation. Soap became a symbol of purity, cars became a status symbol, and clothes became a means of identity. By attaching symbols to products, Bernays bent consumer reality. He turned commodities into psychological experiences, reshaping entire economies around desire rather than need. Today, reality bending continues through technology. The architects of social media platforms discovered that algorithms could not only curate what people saw, but also influence what they believed. By amplifying certain voices and silencing others, by feeding confirmation biases and narrowing exposure, these systems created parallel realities. One person lives in a world where climate change is an urgent crisis. Another lives in a world where it is a hoax. One person lives in a world where democracy is revered. Another lives in a world where democracy is perceived as fraudulent. Both realities seem absolute to those who are inside them. Both realities are bent by the invisible hand of algorithmic suggestion. Throughout history, reality benders share a common trait. They understood that the mind is the true battleground. Armies can conquer lands, but ideas conquer perception. And perception governs everything. Pythagoras conquered chaos with numbers. Jesus and Buddha conquered despair with meaning. Machiavelli conquered politics with appearances. Hitler conquered nations with propaganda. Bernays conquered markets with symbols. Tech moguls conquer attention with algorithms. What unites them is not morality, but mastery. Some bent reality toward liberation, others toward tyranny. Some expanded the horizons of human possibility, others closed them into nightmares. The forbidden book itself is neutral, but its readers are not. Each chose how to wield the knowledge that belief shapes worlds. For the ordinary person, these figures appear almost supernatural. How could one man alter the course of nations, inspire revolutions, or ignite wars? The answer is that they did not change the physical world directly. They altered perception. They rewrote the story through which people understood themselves and their place in the world. And when the story changes, reality changes. This is the unsettling truth that the forbidden book reveals through history. Reality bends for those who master their beliefs. Whether saint or tyrant, philosopher or advertiser, prophet or programmer, the pattern is the same. The human mind is the lever. Suggestion is the fulcrum. Reality itself is what moves. The machinery of modern reality control. Reality bending has always existed. However, in the modern age, it has taken on a new form, one so pervasive and invisible that most of us cannot see it even as we live within it. The forbidden book is no longer hidden in monasteries or locked inside secret societies. It lies in plain sight, encoded in the everyday machinery of media, advertising, politics, and technology. The difference now is scale. What once bent the perception of hundreds or thousands now bends the perception of billions. The 20th century was a turning point. For the first time, radio and television could beam a single voice into millions of homes simultaneously. Never before had propaganda enjoyed such reach. Totalitarian regimes quickly understood the power. Hitler's speeches were amplified through the radio. Stalin's image was widely disseminated through posters, films, and newsreels. In America, Franklin D. Roosevelt used fireside chats to calm a panicked nation during the Great Depression, bending reality from despair to cautious hope. Reality was no longer local. It was broadcast, but it was not only politics. Corporations soon learned that controlling perception meant controlling markets. Advertising shifted from describing products to shaping desires. A bar of soap was no longer soap. It was purity. A car was no longer just transportation. It was a symbol of masculinity or freedom. A soda was no longer sugar water. It was happiness, belonging, rebellion. Entire industries were built not on selling reality as it was, but on constructing realities people would buy into. The forbidden book of persuasion became the playbook of Madison Avenue. The rise of behavioral psychology deepened this machinery. B.F. Skinner demonstrated that behavior could be shaped through reinforcement, showing that people could be conditioned like lab rats. Marketers, educators, and governments took note. To reward specific actions and punish others was not simply to influence behavior, it was also to reinforce it. It was to structure reality itself. What people experienced as a choice was often a narrow path that had been designed for them in advance. By the late 20th century, a new field emerged, behavioral economics. It revealed that humans are not rational calculators, but rather creatures of bias, framing, and habit. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky revealed how easily perception can be influenced. Anchor someone with a high number, and they will tend to estimate higher. Frame a loss as a gain, and they will choose differently. Governments adopted these insights into nudge units, quietly steering populations without coercion. Banks, health agencies, and tech companies followed. Reality became something engineered, nudged at scale by invisible hands. And then came the digital revolution. Suppose the printing press democratized information while television centralized it. The internet, on the other hand, fragmented and personalized it. On the surface, this seemed liberating. Billions could access knowledge once hidden, but the proper machinery was subtler. Algorithms emerged to sort, filter, and amplify content. What you saw online was no longer a neutral window into reality. It was a curated feed optimized for engagement, designed to keep you watching, scrolling, clicking. This was not a conspiracy. It was a business decision. The longer your attention was held, the more ads could be sold. But the unintended consequence was profound. Entire populations began to live in algorithmically generated realities. One person's feed filled with conspiracy theories, another's with cat videos, another's with political outrage. Each believed they were seeing the world as it was. In fact, they were seeing the world through the lens of the algorithm, which predicted they would engage with it most. Reality bent not by priests or kings, but by code. The machinery did not stop at feeds. Recommendation systems, powered by machine learning, began to anticipate desires before they were formed. Netflix suggested your next show. Amazon suggested your next purchase. Spotify suggested your next song. The forbidden book had evolved into predictive text for human life. Choice itself became a script written in advance by algorithms trained on your past. Social media became the new theater of reality bending. A viral tweet could set news agendas. A doctored video could spark outrage. Hashtags could mobilize protests or smear reputations. Politicians realized that perception no longer depended on truth, but on virality. Memes became weapons. Bots became armies. Reality was measured not by correspondence to fact, but by the number of retweets, likes, and shares. The machinery of control had fused psychology with technology. This machinery thrives because it exploits the very principles of belief and suggestion explored earlier. Repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds truth. Authority, once embodied in priests and kings, now resides in influencers, celebrities, and verified accounts. Social proof, the tendency to conform to what others appear to believe, is magnified by follower counts and trending charts. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms prior beliefs, is fed by algorithmic echo chambers. The result is not one shared reality, but countless parallel realities, each bent for maximum engagement. Consider how news itself has changed. In earlier times, news was framed by a handful of broadcasters. Now it is fragmented into countless sources, each tailoring reality to its audience. The same event can be perceived as a massacre or a justified strike, a protest or a riot, corruption or reform, depending on the perspective. The facts may be the same, but the way they are framed changes the reality. And people do not simply disagree about opinions, they inhabit different realities altogether. The danger is not only political polarization, it is ontological instability. When reality itself seems fractured, when no standard narrative binds society, the ground beneath us begins to shake. Trust erodes, institutions collapse, and into that void step those who promise certainty, those who offer simple stories in a world of confusion. The machinery of reality control thus creates both fragmentation and the hunger for authority, a paradox that strengthens those most adept at bending perception. Corporations, too, wield this machinery for profit. Data harvesting enables companies to gather more information about individuals than their families do. Every click, every pause, every scroll becomes a data point. With enough data, patterns emerge. With enough patterns, predictions emerge. With forecasts, suggestions can be made. And suggestions once believed become self-fulfilling. If the algorithm predicts you will like a particular product and shows it to you, you are more likely to buy it. The prediction bends into reality. This raises profound ethical questions. If reality can be bent so easily, who decides which version of reality prevails? Do we trust corporations whose incentive is profit? Do we trust governments whose incentive is control? Do we trust algorithms whose incentive is engagement? Or do we reclaim authorship of our own perception? A task far more difficult than it sounds. Because the machinery is seductive, it promises convenience, entertainment, and certainty. To resist it requires awareness, critical thinking, and often sacrifice. Most prefer the comfort of curated feeds to the discomfort of questioning them. And so the machinery hums quietly in the background, bending reality not through force, but through preference. We may be tempted to dismiss this as exaggeration, but look closely and the evidence is all around us. Elections swayed by targeted misinformation. Epidemics of anxiety fueled by curated comparison on social media. Entire generations are shaping their self-worth based on algorithms that track likes and comments. Conspiracies flourish not in secret societies but in Facebook groups. The forbidden book has been automated, digitized, and monetized. The irony is stark. What was once hidden knowledge available only to elites is now wielded against the masses by systems they voluntarily use every day. The forbidden book has become the terms and conditions we click without reading, the notifications we compulsively check, the feeds we scroll before sleep. And yet, to recognize this is not to despair but to awaken, for the machinery works precisely because it remains invisible. Once seen, it can be questioned. Once questioned, it can be resisted. The forbidden book is dangerous not because it tells us reality can be bent, but because it shows us who is bending it right now, and to what end. We live in an era where reality is bent not once in a century by prophets or dictators, but millions of times each second by algorithms humming quietly in the background. The machinery of modern reality control is vast, complex, and relentless. But like every forbidden book before it, its pages are only as powerful as the belief they command. The question is not whether reality is being bent. The question is, by whom and for whose purpose? The forbidden book within you. If the forbidden book has taken many forms across history, as scripture, as symbol, as propaganda, as algorithm, then perhaps its final and most dangerous form is also its simplest. The forbidden book is not only out there, it is within you. It is written in the architecture of your own mind, in the hidden language of imagination, belief, and meaning. To recognize this is to see that reality bending is not merely something done to you, but something you have always been doing. Think of Neville Goddard, the 20th century mystic who insisted that imagination is not fantasy, but reality in embryo. For him, every act of imagining was a seed planted in the subconscious, a seed that eventually bore fruit in lived experience. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, he taught, and your assumption will harden into fact. Critics dismissed this as magical thinking, but psychologists who studied visualization found something eerily similar. Athletes who mentally rehearsed performance improved almost as much as those who practiced physically. The body responds to imagined experiences as thought they were real. Imagination bent reality from within. Carl Jung offered another path inward. He argued that the psyche is a vast network of archetypes, and that encountering them, in dreams, in symbols, or in inner dialogue, was to awaken to the hidden dimensions of the self. For Jung, the journey inward was no tan escape Buddha confrontation. To integrate the shadow, to recognize the anima or animus, was to become whole. And in becoming whole, the individual no longer lived passively inside inherited narratives. They authored new ones. Reality bent not because the external world changed instantly, but because the meaning of that world shifted from the inside out. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, embodied this truth under the most extreme conditions. In the camps, everything external was stripped away: freedom, family, dignity. Yet Frankl observed that even in such horror, those who found meaning could endure. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, he wrote, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The machinery of terror sought to bend reality into despair. But Frankl discovered the forbidden book within, the ability to reframe suffering as purpose. That reframing was not a fantasy, it was survival. It was liberation in the face of annihilation. What unites Goddard, Jung, and Frankl is the recognition that reality is not merely imposed from the outside. It is generated from the inside, and when the inner script changes, the outer world follows. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. Two people face the same setback: a job loss, a betrayal, or an illness. One sees only catastrophe, and their world collapses. The other interprets it as a turning point, a painful but necessary passage towards something new. The event is the same. The meaning is different, and the meaning determines the reality they live inside. Modern neuroscience offers support for this ancient truth. Studies on neuroplasticity demonstrate that the brain can rewire itself through focus and repetition. Meditation alters brain structure. Visualization strengthens neural pathways. Affirmations, practiced consistently, reshape patterns of thought. In other words, what you attend to, what you imagine, what you repeat, these become the architecture of your lived world. The forbidden book is not mystical ink, but neural circuits. It is the mind's ability to write and rewrite itself. This does not mean that external reality vanishes under willpower. It implies that perception, interpretation, and response, the dimensions through which reality is lived, are pliable. And because action flows from perception, the outer world is also indirectly altered as well. A person who believes they are powerless tends to act passively, and their world becomes one of powerlessness. A person who thinks they are capable acts boldly, and their world responds accordingly. The belief bends the outcome. This is why ancient practices of prayer, mantra, and meditation were so persistent. They were technologies of the inner forbidden book. Repetition of sacred words anchored new patterns of thought. Rituals embodied symbolic truths until they became lived truths. Visualization of deities or holy worlds reshaped the imagination, and with it, reality itself. What seemed like superstition was, at its core, a method of bending perception through deliberate suggestion. Even in modern self-help culture, stripped of ritual and mysticism, the same principle remains in effect. Visualization exercises, affirmations, journaling, and cognitive behavioral reframing are all techniques to rewrite the inner script. They may lack the poetry of ancient myth, but they tap the same forbidden power, the recognition that the story you tell yourself becomes the world you live in. The challenge, of course, is that the forbidden book within you is not written only by you. From childhood, parents, teachers, peers, and media inscribe their pages with beliefs about who you are and what is possible. Some of these beliefs empower, others imprison. To awaken is to recognize that the book you carry may not be your own. Its lines may echo the fears of your parents, the dogmas of your culture, the manipulations of your society. And if so, then bending reality begins with rewriting those lines. But here lies the danger. Once you realize the power of belief, it becomes tempting to retreat into delusion, to assume that all external constraints can be wished away. This is not what the forbidden book within teaches.
Reality has limits.
Gravity does not vanish because you imagine it so. But within the boundaries of physical law, the realm of human experience is astonishingly malleable. What you choose to believe about yourself, about others, and about the future shapes not only your perception but also the actions you take, the opportunities you see, and the resilience you muster. The forbidden book within is not a license for fantasy. It is a responsibility. It requires awareness of the beliefs you hold, the suggestions you accept, and the meanings you attribute. It demands authorship of your own inner script, and it offers no guarantee of comfort. Rewriting the book may mean confronting shadows, discarding inherited illusions, and enduring uncertainty. But in doing so, you reclaim the power that has always been yours, the power to bend reality by bending the lens through which you see it. In a world where external machinery of control grows ever more sophisticated, where algorithms write the stories we consume and corporations script the desires we pursue, the forbidden book within becomes the final frontier of freedom. No algorithm can ultimately dictate the meaning you assign. No advertisement can ultimately decide the story you live by unless you allow it. The machinery can suggest, repeat, nudge, and even coerce. But within the quiet space of consciousness, there remains a freedom that no external power can extinguish, the freedom to rewrite. And this is perhaps the greatest danger of all to those who seek control. For once, people realize that they carry the forbidden book within. They are no longer passive readers of someone else's script. They become authors, and authors are unpredictable. Authors imagine new worlds. Authors resist old narratives. Authors bend reality not for profit or propaganda, but for meaning, for growth, for liberation. To bend reality from within is not to escape the world, but to engage it differently. It is to see possibilities where others see only barriers. It is to endure suffering with purpose rather than despair. It is to recognize that while you cannot control every circumstance, you can control the story you tell about those circumstances. And that story, in turn, shapes your experience, your actions, and ultimately, your world. The forbidden book is not locked in some hidden vault. It is open in every mind, every moment. Its pages are blank until written. Its power lies not in spells or secrets, but in the recognition that meaning creates reality. And once you know this, once you accept authorship of your own inner text, reality begins to bend. The danger and responsibility of reality, bending. Knowledge is never neutral. To learn that reality bends is to uncover a power both liberating and perilous. It is a key that can open doors to healing, creativity, and freedom. But it is also a weapon that can imprison minds, fuel delusion, and justify tyranny. The Forbidden Book does not discriminate between saints and tyrants, healers and manipulators. Its pages are written in the language of belief, and belief obeys whoever knows how to command it. Consider the placebo effect. We celebrate it when it eases pain or accelerates recovery. But its dark twin, the nocebo effect, reveals how suggestion can wound, inform a patient that they are likely to experience side effects, and many will. Tell them a harmless pill is poison and they may grow ill. Belief can heal, but it can also kill. This is the first lesson of responsibility. Every suggestion carries consequences. History provides darker warnings. Cult leaders like Jim Jones and David Koresh mastered the psychology of belief, bending reality for their followers until loyalty demanded their own demise. In Jonestown, more than 900 people drank poison in an act of collective suicide, convinced it was an escape from oppression. They did not die because of reality as it was. They died because of reality as it had been constructed for them. Here, the Forbidden Book became a scripture of destruction. Mass movements exhibit the same peril on a larger scale. Nazi propaganda transformed millions into participants in genocide. The reality presented was that Jews were vermin, enemies, subhuman. Once that belief was internalized, atrocity followed. The horror is not simply that lies were told, but that lies became lived reality. The Forbidden Book, once weaponized, turned entire nations into believers in a nightmare. Even in our own time, we see echoes. Conspiracy movements bend reality for millions, weaving stories of hidden cabals, stolen elections, or apocalyptic battles. For outsiders, these narratives seem absurd. For insiders, they are the absolute truth, defended with zeal. Families fracture, communities dissolve, even violence erupts, not because of reality itself, but because of the reality constructed within minds. The Forbidden Book, in this form, becomes a spiral of delusion. Yet danger is not confined to extremism. Every day, manipulation carries its own risks. Advertising tells us we are inadequate without certain products. Social media metrics tell us our worth is measured in likes and followers. Political rhetoric tells us we are safe only if we obey, free only if we consume. Each suggestion reshapes reality, narrowing the range of what feels possible. The danger lies not only in overt tyranny but in subtle erosion. The slow bending of perception until we no longer notice the cage we live in. The responsibility, then, is twofold. First, for those who would use this knowledge, to ask whether they bend reality toward liberation or toward control. Second, for those who awaken to it, to remain vigilant, for the temptation to misuse it is ever present. Because bending reality is intoxicating, seeing that belief shapes the world can inspire compassion, but it can also inflate one's ego. Leaders who begin as visionaries can become dictators. Teachers who start as healers can become manipulators. Movements that begin as liberation can become cults. The Forbidden Book is filled with power, and power corrupts as easily as it enlightens. This is why philosophy has long paired knowledge with ethics. The Stoics taught discipline, reminding their students that mastery of perception must serve virtue, not vanity. The Buddha warned against attachment, teaching that liberation requires both compassion and insight. Even the Gnostics, accused of heresy, framed their secret knowledge not as license but as responsibility. To awaken was to serve, not to dominate. In the modern world, this responsibility is more urgent than ever. The machinery of media and technology amplifies suggestion to unprecedented scales. A single influencer can bend the perception of millions. A single algorithm can tilt entire elections. A single viral lie can incite violence across continents. The Forbidden Book, once the guarded possession of a few, is now in the hands of anyone with a smartphone. The responsibility is multiplied. For individuals, the responsibility begins inward. To bend your own reality requires honesty, not fantasy. It requires the courage to confront shadows, to question inherited beliefs, to resist comforting illusions. Without this honesty, the Forbidden Book becomes a mirror of delusion, reflecting back only what you wish to see. Responsibility means using the book not to escape reality, but to engage it with it more clearly and compassionately. For societies, the responsibility is collective. Institutions that shape belief, schools, media, governments, corporations, carry immense power. They write and rewrite the stories in which billions live. Their duty is not merely to inform but to protect against manipulation, to safeguard the fragile line between persuasion and coercion. Yet history shows how often this responsibility is abandoned. Profit, power, and control tempt institutions to wield the forbidden book for their own ends, regardless of the cost. The challenge is that responsibility cannot be legislated alone. It must be cultivated in awareness. Each person must recognize that they are not a passive reader of reality, but a co-author. Each must question the stories presented to them, weigh the suggestions they accept, and remain vigilant against the seduction of certainty. Responsibility means living with ambiguity, resisting the comfort of absolute narratives, and holding open the space for truth to emerge. There is also danger in rejecting all narratives, in collapsing into cynicism where nothing is trusted and all is seen as manipulation. This, too, is a misuse of the forbidden book, a refusal to believe in anything, leaving the mind vulnerable to the strongest manipulator who offers false certainty. Responsibility requires balance, to question without despair, to think without surrendering reason, to bend reality without breaking it into chaos. The forbidden book reveals that reality is not fixed. This revelation is both thrilling and terrifying, exciting because it means new worlds are possible, scary because it implies no world is immune to collapse. It places immense power in human hands, and with that power comes tremendous responsibility. The danger of reality bending is not only that others can misuse it, but also that it can be misused by oneself. It is that we can misuse it. Each of us carries the potential to delude, to manipulate, to impose our will on others. The forbidden book whispers possibilities, but it does not whisper boundaries. The boundaries must come from wisdom, from ethics, from humility. Perhaps this is why so many traditions cloaked their knowledge in secrecy. They feared that raw insight without discipline would destroy rather than liberate. They feared that human hunger for power would turn wisdom into tyranny, and they were not wrong. History is filled with examples. The forbidden book is as capable of burning cities as it is of healing hearts. And yet, to forbid knowledge is not a solution. Suppression breeds ignorance, and ignorance makes manipulation easier. The proper solution is responsibility. The forbidden book must be read, but it must also be respected. It must be wielded with care, with awareness of its double edge. We live at a moment when the forbidden book is wide open. Algorithms amplify their principles. The media exploits its power. Individuals stumble upon its secrets in self-help books, spiritual practices, or psychological insights. The question is not whether reality will be bent. It already is. The question is whether it will be inclined toward truth or illusion, compassion or control, liberation or tyranny. Responsibility begins with this recognition. Reality bending is not optional. We are already doing it. Every belief we hold, every story we tell, every suggestion we accept bends the world we inhabit. The only choice is whether we do sound thinkingly, recklessly, selfishly, or consciously, responsibly, and ethically. The forbidden book has always carried this warning. With knowledge comes responsibility. To read its pages is to awaken to power. To wield that power wisely is to bend reality toward light. To wield it foolishly is to plunge into darkness. The choice is ours. Writing your own forbidden book. From the beginning, we followed whispers of a book said to hold the power to bend reality. We traced it through forbidden scriptures, through ancient rites, through psychology, through propaganda, and through algorithms. Each time, the message was the same. Reality is not as solid as it appears to be. It bends. It bends under belief, under perception, under suggestion. It bends under the weight of stories told and retold. And yet, the final revelation is this. The forbidden book is not a single manuscript lost in time. It is not hidden away in dusty monasteries or guarded by secret societies. It is not locked in a vault or buried beneath centuries. The forbidden book is a metaphor for something more intimate, something closer to the heart. It is the recognition that reality itself is authored, that it can be rewritten, that you, whether you realize it or not, are already one of its authors. History has shown us what happens when this power is concentrated in one person or entity. When priests declare themselves the sole interpreters of truth, reality bends toward dogma. When kings claim a divine right, reality tends to bend toward hierarchy. When propagandists control the narrative, reality bends toward tyranny. When algorithms curate our feeds, reality tends to bend toward engagement, distraction, and division. Again and again, those who control the story control the world. But history also shows us another path. Pythagoras bent reality toward order and harmony. Buddha bent it toward liberation from suffering. Jesus bent it toward love and forgiveness. Viktor Frankl bent it toward meaning in the face of despair. Neville Goddard bent it toward imagination as a form of creation. In each case, reality was bent not for domination, but for transformation. Not for control, but for freedom. The Forbidden Book, then, is not only about danger, it is also about potential. It reveals that the prison walls of perception are not unbreakable, that the stories we inherit are not final, that the world we live in can be reshaped, not by ignoring reality, but by reinterpreting it, reframing it, and living into new possibilities. So the question is not whether you will read the Forbidden Book. You already have. You have lived inside it every time your belief shaped your experience, every time your expectation influenced an outcome, every time a story changed the way you saw the world. The actual question is whether you will write your own. To write your own Forbidden Book is to reclaim authorship. It is to notice the stories that have been written into you, by family, by culture, by institutions, and to ask whether they serve you or enslave you. It is to confront illusions, not with cynicism, but with courage. It is to take responsibility for the reality you help create, not only for yourself, but for those around you. This does not mean retreating into fantasy. It does not mean denying facts or pretending that willpower alone can rewrite the laws of physics. Writing your own Forbidden Book means recognizing that within the limits of the world, meaning remains pliable, perception remains pliable, belief remains pliable, and within those pliable spaces, entire worlds can change. Think of how revolutions begin, not with armies, but with ideas. The belief that kings are not divine, the belief that enslaved people are not property, the belief that women are not inferior, the belief that love can transcend race, class, or nation. Each of these began as a suggestion, an alternate reality imagined by a few, ridiculed by many, resisted by those in power. And yet, once believed, once lived, these suggestions bent the world. The Forbidden Book is written in every revolution, every liberation, every expansion of human possibility. But revolutions do not need to be grand to be real. To rewrite the story of your own life is itself an act of reality bending. To choose forgiveness instead of bitterness, to see failure as a teacher instead of a curse, to endure suffering with meaning instead of despair. These, too, are chapters in the Forbidden Book, chapters that reshape the small but profound worlds we each inhabit. The danger, as always, is forgetting that this power carries responsibility. The Forbidden Book is not a toy. It is not a trick. It is a recognition that lives can be shaped, for better or worse, by belief. To write your own book is not to escape responsibility, but to deepen it. For the stories you tell yourself ripple outward. They influence how you treat others, how you act in society, and how you contribute to the larger realities we all share. And so we arrive at the final choice. Will you live inside the story someone else has written for you? Will you surrender to the machinery of media, to the algorithms of profit, to the scripts of authority? Or will you pick up the pen and write your own Forbidden Book? Will you bend reality not toward illusion, not toward tyranny, but toward freedom, meaning, and truth? The Forbidden Book was never dangerous because it contained fantasy. It was risky because it revealed the truth. The truth is that reality is pliable. The truth is that those who know how to bend it can control the lives of others. The truth is that we are never mere spectators in the theater of existence, but participants, co-authors, shapers of the script. In the end, the most forbidden knowledge of all is not how others bend reality, but how you do. To see that the lens through which you look at the world can itself be chosen is to know that you are not only a reader, but a writer. And once you see this, you can never unsee it. The book is now in your hands now. Its pages are blank, waiting. Others will try to write in it for you. They will suggest, persuade, manipulate, and demand. But in the quiet space of awareness, you remain the author. Reality bends for those who dare to write. Reality bends for those who dare to imagine differently. Reality bends for those who dare to read between the lines.